Hi, I'm Pavel. So I would be giving you some snapshots of new trade theory and some empirics of it, some trade theory, how new theory was built. And then today we'll give you bit of overview, not much going into the details. I guess from tomorrow we have much more in details about the theory, about the empirical evidence, about other things as well, and finishing with the gender stuff on trade as well as overall gender and for performance. So before I start, let me give you a brief background of what I do. I'm an applied microeconomist. I do research as of now. I've done more of India using mostly farm RAWS, NSS, ASI datasets. I guess all if you're aware of these datasets. And I'm working on some other aspects on some other countries, developing countries as of now. I'm working on Chile, I'm working in Ethiopia, different issues related to international trade, innovation, and labor markets. I work on labor markets mostly, and a little bit of finance now. So this is very brief what I do. I did my master's from JNU and then PhD in Geneva, and then my postdoc in Oxford, and then I'm teaching in Lancaster now. I'll be shifting within a week to a new university, so I'm finishing my role in Lancaster. So it's the last couple of weeks in Lancaster before this. And I may not remember the names of all of you, but please introduce me. I'll introduce you and what you do so that I still have some in my subconscious mind of what you guys are from, rather than just bombarding with you with information. So you can start with you.
Hi, sir. I'm Nikita Sharma. I'm first year PhD scholar. My research area is broadly something PhD and more research.
Okay. I'm
from Competition&Homogeneous. My RDC has been completed. Research area agriculture finance.
My name is Prajapati, and I am also from Kanpur University. And my coursework is and my area is related to international trade and Sir, my name is Mohammed Akbar. I'm from Jamaica, Department of Economics, and my broad area of research is in formal sector, and I am very specific about what I'm going to do.
No worries.
My name is Kamlo Kumar. I'm from Banaras Hindu University. I'm doing PhD from Department of Economics. And my area of research is public finance and trade.
My name is Rohit Sharma. I'm doing a PhD in economics from Doon University. And I'm currently working Doon University, State University. And my research topic is sustainable development of micro enterprises in the Himalayan region of Uttarakhand.
So, China is a topic. I currently work as an assistant professor at Christ University in Lavaste campus.
Christ in Bangalore.
No, Pune Lavaste.
Okay. Okay.
So I completed my PhD from the University of Kerala. So the basic views. I'm a lecturer in Science College in the Monopolistic University.
Good afternoon. My name is Neha Rani, and I'm also in PhD from Heterogeneous University, and my topic is India trade taxes with artists. PhD scholar with IIT Chennai certificate, and you all the gender and farm related half of months. Okay. Basically, to this.
Yes.
I didn't work at the moment. I'm from I'm into second year in PhD. And research areas are impact of activities of women will becoming empowerment and all areas and things. My name is Nikita Dhawan, and I'm from Heterogeneous University. And my research area is L02. Hello, sir. I'm Saralika Sharma. I am about to enter my fourth year of PhD from Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, Delhi. And my topic of research is working on how to push qualitative product to improve the trade patterns. I'm building a theoretical model and later on I'll be testing it.
Who is supervisor in that?
Sunita Rajan. Sunita Rajan.
She's taking
About to retire in coming children.
Hello, sir. My name is Salim Arula. I'm about to start my fourth year at IIT Indore, and I'm following your work only. So I'm working on China shop, innovation, and trade.
Myself, Mohit Jindal. I am working with one of the athletic institute of education in Ghaziabad. And recently I submitted my proposal in IIT Patna for the place. It is on the consumer e-commerce return policy.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Anil Gamija, working as an assistant professor at RPSU College, Karachi.
Good afternoon, sir. I am from Aligarh Muslim University. My name is Abhishek. My research topic revolves around regional economic integration in South Asia.
My name is Shunali Sheikh and I'm from Aligarh Muslim University and my research area is
good. You have some interest in trade. So let's get on what I intend to do today. So I guess you have done in the morning with how trade theory evolved from old trade theory to neoclassical trade theory. What I'll start with the new trade theory. How the birth of new trade theory happened. When did it happen? How did it happen? So till the 1970s, economists as a whole, especially trade economists, we work a lot with the data. We didn't have much access to big computers to compute some big numbers, also large data sets. We didn't have any such information available. Okay. And HO model, which is, I guess, in the morning we have all gone with the HO, the Heterogeneous model, dominated the trade economists. What Heterogeneous model said? Heterogeneous model said the countries with dominant trade in their comparative advantage industries. I produce something better than you, I will trade in that. If I produce shoes, I export shoes. If I don't produce shirts, I will import shirts. That was a very, very simple thing of HO theory. But what happened in the 70s when we started having access more to data sets, more to international product level data sets, where how the countries are doing data. So trade, Grubel and Lloyd, Herbert Grubel and Peter Lloyd, and Canadian economist and Australian economist, published a book, Inter-Industry Trade, which showed that the most of the world's trade cannot be explained by nature. What we observe in the data is actually not consistent with the trade, what we have. And a lot of trade theories you'll see after that, new trade theory, a lot of new actually evolved from empirical observation. We had first empirical observations, what is happening in the world, then you try to put it into theory. That's a good thing of economics, also a bad thing. We try to always rationalize or put things into theoretical model to logify what is happening in the world. So that was Grubel and Lloyd. They published a book showing that we cannot explain what is the standard definition of HO model, right? And not Olin, Hexter, no, Olin's not Hexter. Olin got a Nobel Prize on HO theory. And that theory cannot be explained with data set. So what happens? Most difficulties were, what are the most difficulties they found out? That most of the world trade was intra-industry trade. No intra-industry trade. What is intra-industry trade? Intra-industry trade means that people, I'm producing shoes, I am exporting shoes, as well as I'm importing shoes. That's intra-industry trade. I'm producing clothes, shirts, and exporting shirts, as well as importing shirts. That's what not the HO model theory says. HO model theory says, I have a comparative advantage in producing shirts, so I export shirts. But the data, or the actual data, said that is not the case. We are exporting and importing in intra-industry goods two-way in similar goods. And that's possible. During the 1970s, how do you explain this? And all we understood was HO theory, Ricardo, everything Ricardo Weiner, HOV, Ricardo Weiner, everyone said competitive advantage, absolute advantage matters, but the World Trade data says it doesn't. We trade similar goods. HO and HO, as I said, HO predicts, measures inputs, and inputs consist of very different goods, right? Shirts versus shoes versus computers versus chairs, something like this. And most of this inter-industry trade was between nations which have to have very similar factor endowments. Like I use, for example, if UK is trading with US, they used to have very similar factor endowments. That means they're using very similar amounts of labor and capital in producing 1 unit of similar. If I'm producing 1 unit of shirt, I'm using very similar amount of capital, very similar amount of labor. How do you explain this? It's very difficult to explain this because if I have similar kind of labor and capital, how do I explain producing the same goods? I can, but why do I trade then? Why shouldn't we trade in the similar goods? If I produce the same shirt as you, why should I buy it from you? I will be consuming my own good, right? So that's contradicting what the age of that was actually the word people then started thinking, what is it that's going on that we are actually not kind of capturing through the HO model? So Grubel and Lloyd gave some indications. They did not actually theorize what we understand as trade theorists. Who theorized actually got the Nobel Prize and later on. We'll come to that. Grubel and Lloyd thought one thing can explain this, which is increasing returns to scale. We all know about why increasing returns to scale. So what is it? Why increasing returns to scale is important? Because the HO model, what we thought about was constant returns to scale, always. That we have similar unit of production when you produce 1 unit. Even if I produce that good 2 units, that means always have similar marginal cost, for example. We always care about marginal cost, right? So our marginal cost doesn't change between the number of production varieties that we produce. It always is constant. That's called constant returns to scale. However, you double the input, double the output, right? So that means marginal cost is not changing at all. That means, if you think of it literally, that means we are not learning from what we produce. That we are not doing innovation. What we do is actually, when we produce one good, then we keep on producing that. We learn the efficient or the least cost way of producing that good, right? But HO model never thought of it. They thought it's always you're producing at the same marginal cost throughout the production process and producing it. Grubel and Lloyd say one way would be explaining is as I'm producing more of one good, it could be increasing returns to scale. That means my marginal cost, let's say we are both producing shirts, if I'm increasing returns to scale, then my marginal cost goes down significantly than you. So I'm producing goods at cheaper prices. That's why you're buying it from me, right? That could be one explanation. There are many other explanations. We'll come one by one. This is the first one they thought. There could be one explanation why people are dealing with. If I'm producing and trade cost, think about trade cost is very small. If trade cost is very small, then it makes sense to buy it from you rather than producing myself. That means it goes back to the HO theory actually. That means you have actually a competitive advantage in producing the similar good better than you. So there is a competitive advantage going on around it. It's not, we are completely discarding competitive advantage. We are discussing competitive advantage, but within the similar. And I am producing a good in a better fashion than you. Because I've learned producing that good over the years in a least cost efficient manner. That's why there's increasing returns to scale. And what happens? Increasing returns to scale means if my marginal cost goes down, what happens? Profit goes down. Very simply, I have more markups, my profit goes up. That's why increasing returns to scale. The more I produce, my goes higher the profit is. To give you an example, can you imagine which kind of firms or companies produce at the least, which firms have the highest profits? You keep on seeing the news. Which type of firms have the highest profits?
Springers and that.
No. I mean, which kind of type of firms have the highest type of profits? The which registers, when you see the papers, this firm has registered that amount of profit, which are the ones always register the highest profits?
So they're producing mobile phones.
Phones, but these are called something named called multi-MNCs. The MNCs always you will see register the highest profit. But why they register the highest profit?
Because they are into multiple diverse.
That's true. They have a larger market access. But why they can sell at the larger market access? Because they produce the good at the least cost. That's why their profits are high. They are producing a good in the most efficient way. That's why they can sell at multiple markets. They can compensate for all the trade costs because they produce the good as the least possible way that can be produced. That's a very simple economics here. If I can produce the good because I have higher markups, I can sell as many as possible. That's about it. That's why MNCs are the biggest firm. That's why MNCs give more money to their employees. That's why MNCs are bigger firms because they produce at the cheapest that we can, but efficient. Cheapest means not cheap good. They produce efficiently at the cheap possible. They have found out somehow that this is the most cheapest and high quality way you can produce it. That's why the MNCs have increasing returns to scale. So quite a number of, as we are saying, quite a number of non-mathematical economists know about this importance of IIT or the intra-industry trade and put forth some informal analysis focusing on IRS, but nobody kind of formalized it. Nobody thought it. One advantage of disadvantage economics, you have to formalize it with a theory model. Otherwise, you don't get to understand what's going on. Okay, it's one way it's really good because it helps mathematics, helps you understand the logic. Sometimes it gets difficult to portray things to a different interdisciplinary audience, that what's going on in the model. Anyway, the basic idea was simple. Trade occurs when things are made in one nation and consumed in another, right? IRS explains why production of particular goods is concentrated in one single nation than dispersed among all nations. Let's say this kind of shirt, because products are differentiated. Even when we are producing shirts are differentiated. This kind of shirt may be produced very efficiently only by Vietnam or Bangladesh. That's why they're producing. They're very simple. This is, or you have half, let's say, half of this, they produce better by India. That's why they're producing. So that's why it is IRS can only explain why this differentiated goods, similar kind of goods, but if you go down, disaggregate, there are differentiated goods. So this also Gruber and Lloyd said that there is a broad similarity of taste across rich nations that can explain IIT. Because only then, by the 70s, we have data only for the European countries and the US. We didn't have data for developed countries because no one was properly recording data. So only the European countries and US was recording the data, and they found out that because there's a similar, because taste and preference also drives trade, right? The way I'm buying goods is driven by my taste. So because they have very similar taste, that's why the rich nations can explain the IIT because of the similar kind of taste. You please stop me whenever you feel like, whenever something is unclear. I may be going fast. Please stop me anytime you can. And at the same time, you are lucky exactly at the same point in time, Avinash Dixit and Joseph Stiglitz came out with this mind-boggling paper, Love for Variety, in 1977 AER paper, which kind of revolutionized the way we understand IO. Then IO got into trade, then it got revolutionized. So what they said was, people prefers, very simple, in one line, that people prefers different kinds of variety of goods. There's a love for variety. We don't, as a human being, we do not prefer similar goods. We always try for variety. If you go for food, we also try variety of goods. Any kind of thing you think about, we always try different kinds of goods because as consumer, we love variety. That is the one can think about. That's why can explain now similar nations trading within similar goods, because there's a variety within, even within similar goods. Shoes are different. Even we are maybe all wearing trainers. The trainers are different because of their sole maybe depth, because of their sole maybe how thick they are, how much you can jump on the sole. There are very different kinds of trainers, even you are trading in the trainers. So, and then what happened was, these guys came in, Paul Krugman, James Panter, Victor Norman, and Nal Hepburn, and James Marcuson, tried to model this. Model, when you are modeling something, we always try to model, we always try to think things in a general equilibrium setup. Until and unless we think about general equilibrium and what happens in a general equilibrium framework, general equilibrium means I am looking at n set of countries. If I can rationalize my theory, putting a model with n set of countries, then we are actually putting the model in a general equilibrium setting. Otherwise, two countries would be a partial equilibrium operation. Right? So that was a new theory that provides the useful understanding of many aspects of the real world. That old trade theory, which was started with Ricardo, then Ricardo Weiner, Exter-Holland, to assume away due to perfect competition and constant returns to scale that we're discussing. We moved from this away. And some of the classical economists also had this idea, but not had the mathematical training to crystallize the logic. And if you have time, go through. So Krugman, we'll do this Krugman basically. So Paul Krugman, who won the Nobel Prize in 2008, wrote seminal articles of these two, 79 and 1980, and then we'll do the economic geography, and then in 1991, another seminal articles. That he took the trade theory and put it into a spatial equilibrium approach. What happens with increasing returns to scale, people do trade. What happens in a spatial input? So if you have some time, go through Paul Krugman, Jim Brander. Jim Brander basically, so Paul Krugman will come, but let me give you some heads up. Paul Krugman did it with monopolistic competition. Jim Brander changed it into a oligopolistic competition. The results are more or less the same, but we learn new things. Now, Paul Krugman, why Paul Krugman got the Nobel and Jim Brander may not? Jim Brander wrote equally seminal articles because there's maybe a bit of luck or maybe a bit of something else was driving, because working with monopolistic competition or solving models with monopolistic competition got very easy. And this got too easy for people to solve, not with the oligopolistic competition. And the market, the way the market behaves, the real world, was more with monopolistic competition than oligopolistic competition. Oligopolistic competition is only features in very particular industries. Monopolistic competition is across every industry that you observe. So that's why Paul Krugman's theory got more and more popular rather than Jim Brander's. Then the other guys also came in to write extensions of the new trade theory. Let me start. So what was the problem? Just to refresh, to explain similar trade between two countries, two new assumptions come in. As we're discussing monopolistic competition, because one of the biggest problem was perfect competition. So monopolistic, we've done with the monopolistic competition, and the kind of problem was with the monopolistic competition. First few times was of model closure. We couldn't find analytical solutions. It was very easy to close the model and to find analytical solution, that means to achieve equilibrium. To derive equilibrium was very easy with perfect competition. It was not easy that with the monopolistic competition to derive equilibrium numbers or equilibrium parameters. We have to derive equilibrium parameters, right? That's why we close the model. And it increasingly returns to scale. So these are the two things which were fundamentally different in the new trade theory rather than the HO model. Right? But new trade theory, as we said, Stiglitz made the micro basic of it, which is the monopolistic competition and love for variety, with the constant elasticity of substitution utility functions. That means people, as a constant substitute goods at a constant elasticity. That if I don't use this, or production function as well, the proportion of producing any good of two inputs, let's say capital and labor, becomes constant. That's the constant utility, the constant elasticity of substitution. Krugman changed the market structure. That's the 79 Journal of International Economics paper from his PhD thesis, market structure, monopolistic competition. Each firm produces a differentiated product. Differentiated product means there is some characteristics of these products which are different from it's not really. So I have, if you go back to the theory, that I have certain level of monopoly over my. That's monopolistic competition, right? We have increasing returns to scale. We are facing a parametric demand function. Product differentiation is presumed to be developed from consumer preferences because we have love for variety here. And increased product variety increases consumer welfare. That's one of the key takeaway that we get from Krugman 79, that trade actually increases variety. We do more trade. Why we see lots of variety of different products? Because we do trade. That's why you see one kind of thing has a differentiated products as well, because we have love for variety. That's why we have much more product variety. And that actually increases consumer welfare because we have a love for variety. So that's why. So what Ricardo Weiner, HO model all focus on differences between nations at the source of trade. What Krugman did was geographical concentration of varieties. That they produce different varieties in different nations within the same good. Even within shirts, Bangladesh is producing one set of shirts, Vietnam is producing another set of shirts, India is producing another set of shirts, China is producing another set of shirts. Even within the shirts, we have this concentration of different varieties. That's the monopolistic competition. That's we are bringing in. And obviously, IRS explains why production is concentrated here, because this kind of shirts, maybe Vietnam knows the best way to produce. That kind of shirt, India knows the best way to produce. That's why it's concentrated geographically. Now, there are two things here. One is resource constraint, because one nation cannot make it all. You can imagine the world demand, and Vietnam cannot produce everything for the world demand. There are preferences here as well. Not only Vietnam cannot produce, let's say, this kind of shirt for the entire world demand, it's also maybe I have taste to buy this kind of shirt, which produces a lower quantity maybe in Bangladesh, from Bangladesh. I'd like to buy it from Bangladesh, for example. So taste and preferences, along with the resource constraint, is also make some production of unique varieties or differentiated varieties. So each nation, as we say, makes some unique varieties, but some of every variety. So that's why we can see inter-industry trade between similar products and similar countries. Clear? So Krugman 79 basically shows that two identical countries. If you have not read the paper, please read. It's one of the most simply written and one of the most simple mathematics you can find in a paper with mind-boggling implications, policy implications, and real-world implications. It's the most simple mathematics I've ever seen to do. Is his PhD thesis. It's a very, very intelligent guy. Now has become journalist. That's a different point. Shows two identical countries, each with monopolistic competitive industry, could gainfully engage in trade, intra-industry trade with each other. And gains from trade, so now, what are the gains from trade that we learn? We learn that increased product variety, we have more varieties now, because we are trading with each other, because we have love for variety, this kind of goods coming from that country, that kind of goods coming from the third country, and increased scale of production. So if we have IRS, which lowers the price somewhat, because I'm producing the goods at a lower cost, so I'm charging low to you. So that's why we have two gains from trade from this new model. And the direction of trade, so Krugman did not conclude the direction of trade, which country will produce, export which good, but the total volume of good is determined, that it will increase, the total volume of trade will increase, but who will export exactly what, that is indeterminate in Krugman's model. He did not give any kind of solutions who will determine what. It depends on a lot of different, where if you draw a distribution of prices, where you will be in the distribution of prices, it depends on how you will export the good, or how much of it will export the good and import the good. We actually export the same good and also import the same good as well. In every country does that. Krugman 80, and all of this, remember, all of this coming with homogeneous firms. Homogeneous firms mean marginal cost of producing the good is similar across you and for everyone within the same industry. It's still a new theory, great theory, but it's still homogeneous firms. But the marginal cost between firms does not differ. It's MCI, I is firm. For any firm. So Krugman 1980, another GIE paper, introduces transport cost and allowing for diversity of testing between countries. And what they did gave rise to another very crucial conclusion from trade was home market effect. That means a country produces more of goods where a large home market exists. That means farms, it boils down to farms, right? Basically, the manufacturing farms are producing. The farms are only producing those goods which have a bigger demand, producing not only those goods, I should rephrase my sentence. The farms are producing those goods at a larger quantities, which have a larger demand internally in the home market. So think about India. Come back to you'll always see the growth of, or GDP growth of whatever growth, it comes from the home market effect actually. It comes from the selling, because it has a big home market. Actually, the home market effect actually happens. You can try it. We can actually do an exercise and see if this is actually true or not. This is true. The Indian firms produces goods. You'll see for the other firms as well that because India has a large home market, they tend to produce more of those goods which has a larger demand in the home market. I tend to produce those goods, so that's because there is transport cost and there is diversity of test, and we have, the more diversifying the country is, the more, like the US is also very diversified. The more diversified the country is, there will be allowing for the home market effect. They will produce goods for you, because if it's costly to trade, there is a cost to trade, right? If it's costly to trade, and if you have a diversity of taste within that country, you tend to produce goods which domestic market demands for. That's called the home market effect. You will not see of this in small European nations, because in Europe, the trade cost is zero, almost, transport cost. Almost zero. There is no transport cost. You go, because borders are open, you can go from one country to another without anything, because there is no customs, the borders are open, and diversity of test is pretty much low, because so that's why the home market effect works in the diversified nations more rather than small diversified nations. So that's but it also restored the trade theory, the original trade theory, by using monopolistic competition and economies of scale with comparative advantage. So think about it. It goes back to actually HO. So I'm producing goods which I have actually have competitive advantage. So it goes back to HO. Ultimately, it goes back to HO not on a larger scale. HO is explaining everything with a larger scale. So we are producing a differentiated product as competitive advantage. We are producing this differentiated product with competitive advantage, but not everything. Because we don't have competitive advantage in producing everything that we export, that we produce. That's why the home market effect, that we tend to produce more of this, of which we have an advantage in the home market. So Brander has, again, Brander did this, all of this with oligopoly. He just changed the monopolistic competition assumption to oligopolistic assumption and changed stuff. What it resulted was a phenomenon called reciprocal dumping. When Brander did this, we had a new phenomenon. So we had home market effect before, we have product gains from product variety from 1979, we have home market from 1980, and we have reciprocal dumping from 1980. And what reciprocal dumping means, each firm had an incentive to sell more in each other markets as long as price is excessive marginal cost. So I have produced more certain kind of goods, I'll sell more to you. You sell that kind of goods, you sell to me. So that's called reciprocal dumping. I'm not because my price is far exists from the marginal cost, I keep on dumping your markets with the production that I do. You keep on dumping. See, since you are saying you are dumping my market with the goods that you have competitive advantage, because remember what is oligopolistic competition? Your oligopolistic competition means you're like, which industry is oligopolistic competition features?
Yeah.
The oil. The very similar, right? It's an oligopolistic competition industry. So oil, if you, for example, if you're this kind of industries, if you're producing that similar kind of oil and dumping me, if I'm producing similar kind of goods, I'll be dumping you. Because we both have price better than marginal cost. And so on. In oligopolistic competition, the phenomenon arises with trade is called reciprocal dumping. It stops some point in time, after some point, but it rises the reciprocal dumping phenomenon. I keep on dumping your market, and you keep on dumping your market. There has to be collusion. The problem is that collusion rises after this. So once you see that my market is getting lost and your market is getting lost by the other one, then you kind of collude. So we'll see. We have this like phenomenon where I live. There are two petrol stations, one with British Petroleum and one with Shell. Last 8 years, I have not seen even 1 pence is different in their oil prices. It's exactly the same because they are located within 1 kilometer of each other. Because otherwise there would be reciprocal. If I cut down even 1 pence, one customer will go there. Then I cut down 1 more pence, one customer will go there. So they have collude. They are always collude. Whatever the market price is, they will collude and keep the same. Because 1 kilometer drive is nothing, right? You will go there, you will go there. To save even 1 pence or 2 pence, because difference between 1 pence, if I do 10 liters or 50 liters, I'll say 50 pence, for example. There's a bit of saving there, right? So this is James Brander. Then Brander and Krugman wrote another, he extended Brander, showing that conclusions are robust for a more general specification where firms' behavior and account. So what they found was, if transport costs are low, the dumping that results from trade liberalization is welfare enhancing. So you have, if you have low transport cost, then you have more of other countries' goods. And since we know love for variety of products, variety increases welfare, consumer welfare increases, right? We are not talking about producer welfare there. We're just talking about consumer welfare. Consumer welfare increases. Now, the economic geography. What economic geography does, what Krugman did after this was increasing returns and imperfect competition. It was if I'm sure, it was not an analytically tractable model because of imperfect competition. We had to assume afterwards certain form of competition to close the model. any special model is not always analytically solvable. So industrial organizations supplied the toolbox. Nutrient theory was the first application with this economic geography, and space was at that time did the technical tricks. So all this put together, Krugman put all this together and developed this two-region, two-sector model, and had one agriculture, which has CRS, employing sector-specific immobile factors of production. The other was manufacturing, which exhibits IRS and employs mobile factors of production. They kind of understood that in agriculture, you like land is immobile, right? There are other factors also. There's immobility. People do not move much between ones. Let's say, for example, agricultural workers. Now, at least maybe I don't know much. I cannot comment. But long back, agricultural workers do not move much, and manufacturing workers do move more from one sector to another, from one space to another space. What I mean by space is region, state, whatever you can think of. Manufacturing products are differentiated, as we all know, and by now, market structure is imperfectly competitive. Krugman initially did not assume any sort of structure to the market. Neither monopolistic competition, neither oligopolistic, neither perfect, nothing. Just imperfect market competition. So still quite competitive in monopolistic sense, where firms can never earn economic rent. So you do not have supernormal profits. And short run is differentiated from the long run by the mobility of workers, with workers presumed mobile in the short run and mobile in the long run. So what happens was, and also what he assumed was, this term called, I don't know if I've heard of it, called iceberg trade cost. Have you heard of this term? Iceberg trade cost. So iceberg trade cost means what we trade, some part of its loss will be fended up. Some part of the value of that cost. So that's why if you actually go and compare what I am exporting and the country of that product is importing, let's say China is exporting shirts to India. If you see China's exports value, and if you see that of that product, India's imports value is never matches. Is almost ever never matches. It should match, right? Because I am of that shirt I'm importing from China, it should match. It should be the same thing volume of good, same value of good, it never matches. So that actually explains iceberg trade cost.
But
There's
that can be due to like a statistical discrepancy or
it could be, but it cannot be consistently across the world, across every country, across every product. There could be, absolutely. There are sensitive discrepancies. The way we record is different, but it cannot be explained everything. Systematically, it cannot explain every product. Right? The other part of iceberg product trade cost, what we think was, what is iceberg? Iceberg is, what is the feature of the iceberg? We can see only 1/3 of it, 2/3 of it we can't see. So when you actually try to export something, the iceberg trade cost in trade has a cost. When you try to, let's say we have determined 10 units of export of something. We going to export, and then we went to actually export it. So there are so many costs associated with it, we tend to keep our volume down. So that's actually lost in transit that we call it. We cannot explain this, but we call it this iceberg, because one part of the trade cost you cannot see. There's some hidden cost in trade. Maybe there are some, like if you're sending somewhere, for example, in a large container ship, there are deep ports there. The port, the ship has to stand like, I don't know, 10 miles away from the port. There has to be a separate vessel that brings it, that adds a cost to it. So all these are trade costs. That kind of dissuades exporter not to export, because I cannot pay this cost to do this. I cannot wait because the importer's getting this, then sending, because how the trade happens. You export it, and the importer, unless the importer gets it, you are not being paid. The more the trade cost is higher, all this extra various coming, the later your payment is. That's a problem. That's why we call it iceberg trade cost, that you can't see all of the trade cost that is involved when exporting. There's an interesting experiment. They couldn't conclude actually it happened in the UK, that they provided information to the farms about exporting, which are farms which do not export. They provided booklet, and they couldn't conclude the study. They just did the first baseline. So they did booklet to the non-exporters saying why export is actually good or not, and what we do. And they observed them for 6 months, and they found out that export has actually gone down. Yes, they did not increase. So because iceberg rate cost is there. So pattern of economic activities and how it evolves over time is determined by the extent of economies of scale, transport cost, percentage of the activities that is potentially mobile. So, for example, if economies of scale in manufacturing are weak, transport costs are very high, then and manufacturing is a small percentage of the overall economic activity, then what you see is economic activities are spatially dispersed. Because there is no economies of scale. When there are economies of scale, we see manufacturing activities are closely linked. Because I derive certain economies of scale from you to understand. So I have a paper now. What I have done in that paper is we have geocoded all the R&D centers in India. And we show that we trade the probability and we match the patent data with it. So we show that when we have large supply side shocks, trade competition or input competition goes up, farms have a tendency to drop innovation because foreign competition is high, innovation is costly, is uncertain. So I don't know if I am producing that good for 5 years, I'm going to succeed or going to have a higher profits in that, because there are already markets flooded with foreign goods. So in general, this is true. What we found interesting with that economies of scale is farms which are located within 50 kilometers range of a big innovative farm, their innovation potential goes up. Because I'm drawing economies of scale from you. If I'm a small farm, I cannot import, for example. I can ask you to go, you are importing, add 2 more containers to your import. So I can get better goods from abroad. So when you spatially co-located, that means you're drawing economies of scale. That's why we get agglomeration economics. When you're in a flight, this becomes very evident when you're in a flight. We go up from a city, everything is very dark. You are 30 minutes away from Delhi, if you are, you'll see a little bit of lights. You are 15 minutes away from Delhi, you start seeing more lights. You are 5 minutes away from Delhi, you see a lot of lights. That means economies are spatially agglomerated. We tend to spatially agglomerated because we tend to trade with each other, because there is also trading going on, right? Not in the perspective of international trade, but there is also farms to farm trade. I buy goods from you, you buy goods from me, that is also trade. And that's why we draw economies of scale from each other. We don't know, there's a resource constraint. We cannot do everything. We cannot know everything of that particular production process, how it's produced, how are goods being imported, how to export goods, because there has to be knowledge diffusion. Only when you have economies of scale, there is knowledge diffusion. Because we learn from each other, that's why we try to tend to be spatially agglomerated. When there is no economies of scale, there is dispersion of economic activity. That's what Krugman said. And that's actually got him the Nobel Prize. Because no one kind of theorized it ever. Then comes Melis 2003. How much time? I'll finish with this. This is the new trade theory. Melis 2003 is kind of another game changer in international economics and international trade, also economics. Even if you see development economics, before development economics used to be only concentrated in utilizing individual level data, worker level data. Now in development, a lot of development uses development economics, uses farm level data as well. So because what Melis said, did two beautiful things. He merged Krugman with, if you have a chance, look at this article by Hugo Hoppenhagen in 1992 in Econometrics. So he merged these two articles. Krugman said monopolistic competition with increasing returns to scale, and Hugo Hoppenhagen said that farms are inherently heterogeneous. That means every farm has different marginal cost of production. MCI, if I write this, MCI before, for Krugman, MCI was like sigma for every I, let's say 1 to n. This is Krugman. Merritt said MCI just simply could be sigma I.
Different color.
Oh, you cannot see. Oh, sure, absolutely. Sorry. Does be okay? No, white should be okay, no? White is better. I don't know. And take 10 more minutes. This is okay. So Krugman's said MCI is sigma for I to n. Merritt said no. MCI is actually sigma. That's the fundamental difference between Merritt and Krugman. Everything remains the same. We have monopolistic competition, we have increasing returns to scale, but he made farms heterogeneous. These changes means everything changes. Every farm is different now. Yes. Right? So key finding, and also like Krugman, these also came from these two gentlemen, Bernard and Jensen's 1996 GI article, 1999 GI article, again empirical observations. What they found was that exporters, we'll do an exercise on this tomorrow, exporters tend to be larger than non-exporters. Exporters are more capital intensive, exporters are more productive, exporters are more pay higher wages, exporters differs with the non-exporting firms significantly across every dimension. How this is possible? Then Pellets started thinking, I guess he was during the PhD actually, because this is his PhD paper, main paper, and he was doing a PhD there. He finished in 2003 and he was doing PhD, so we kind of started to theorize. Interestingly, when Krugman was a PhD student, then all these Grubel Lloyd papers were coming out. And Krugman started thinking with these empirical observations. It's very interesting that the empirical observations, they were PhD students and the empirical observations have started coming in during that point in time. And that kept on thinking, why can't we explain this kind of, with why empirical observations are different from theoretical, what we observe in the field. Then he said this. So what is the essence of the Merritt's model? And then let me draw the diagram and I'll finish. So all firms are exactly identical, but exposed different. What I mean by, I'll show you what I mean by that. What he means is, just to give you every firm, how do Merritt's organize this? So every firm goes into a room, which has a ball of productivity distribution. Now this farm takes out the productivity parameter and sees their productivity distribution. Oh, this is where I am. And then kind of decides what they want to do. But for every farm who is entering that room, there is a sunk cost. So imagine this economic. What does he actually mean? We go, let's say all our farms, we decide to produce one input. The sunk cost is setting up the plant. After we set up the plant, we kind of know actually the cost of what we can use to produce that good. Before, we just had a hunch. We can actually do this, but unless we spend that sunk cost, we don't know at what marginal cost you're actually producing the good or not. Right? That's what the meaning by productivity distribution. So there is a productivity draw. Each firm draws one productivity parameter, and once it is drawn, it doesn't change. There's a lower bound productivity level, and there is, if you are below that, you will exit immediately. And once in all industry incumbents, however productive is a constant exogenous probability of death, that means there is a probability of exit from the market. If you cannot produce at the most efficient way, you exit. And there also exists a competitive fringe of potential entrance, because if someone is seeing from the outside, there's a supernormal profits that you're producing the goods, people try to enter that markets, right? And entry proceeds as long as expected profits are sufficient to cover the entry cost, and in equilibrium, we have the expected net profits to 0. So if I draw Melitz, what happens is like this. If I draw this, what I have put in the points, it will be simply like this. You have, this is the frequency. All of you can see, right? I'll move away. This is marginal cost. Now, there is a distribution. Let's say this is a distribution of marginal cost, which A is the marginal cost and GAA is the PDF or the CDF of the marginal cost. This is the highest amount. This says AZ. This is the total amount of funds. That's the highest marginal cost. And if we, let's say, let me put this. So now if you are here, let me put this ADAX. What does this mean? So now you draw productivity distribution from productivity parameter. You go and you kind of realize what my productivity means. Think productivity as marginal cost. This is the amount of marginal cost I'm producing 1 unit of good. If my marginal cost is above this, I'm never producing. This is the N types or never producing types. This is the marginal cost of producing, highest marginal cost of producing at the domestic market. See, if my marginal cost is above this, then no one is going to buy from me, right? Even if I'm selling the domestic market, because anyone who is producing here produces at lower cost than me. And my price is higher than you. So no one is going to buy with me. So there's no point in producing. Here, that means this one is the domestic price. And this one, which is the biggest of the firms, is actually the exporters. So if your productivity distribution is below AX, then you can only export. Because your marginal cost of producing a good is very, very low. You have higher profits, you can, market access is higher, you can sell to higher markets. And this is where you only produce for, but these guys can sell. So all the exporters also sell in the domestic goods, domestic market as well. So these guys can sell here, but these guys cannot sell here. Because if I want to sell here, these guys are going to outperform me. But if I'm going to sell here, these guys are not going to outperform me. So also you will see the exporters also have bigger sales even in the domestic market because they're producing goods at a lower cost. So when it's basically divided farms into these 3 types, people going into production function distribution, deciding what the productivity parameter is, realizing that my production or marginal cost why they're not producing? Because my marginal costs are not going to cover the sunk cost of production. That's why I will not produce, because I'm not going to recover my fixed cost of production. If I have a productivity below than this, then I'm going to recover, but I'm not efficient enough to export. This is only where I export. That's why you see a small percentage of firms export actually. And there are evidences of two set of exporting firms. One is self-selection and one is learning by export. I export, when I learn how to export produce goods, then I start exporting. And one is people tend to think that I am good enough, that I have a low productivity and I can export and I can export. I self-select myself to the export market. And most of the empirical evidences have said that the self-selection mechanism works rather than exporting by learning by exporting. And I am already producing goods very efficiently. That's why I self-select myself to the export market. That's what most of the evidence, empirical evidence is like people. Yes. So there are two ways: is self-selection. How do exporters go to the export market? Why do you export? One is you self-select yourself, and one is learning by exporting. Imagine you can draw analogy for this to any kind of competition that you go in. That I know I'm practicing myself, I'm good enough to participate in that competition, that I'm self-selecting myself in that competition. Sometimes happens is I participate in smaller competitions to learn about my abilities more and then kind of go into doing more competitions. There are two ways, right? You're practicing at home and you know I'm very good and then going to the competition. So that's what firms are also. I am producing goods at a lower cost. I know I am good. I can produce high quality goods at a lower cost. That's why I self-select myself into the export market. I know I can perform in the export market. And the other one is learning by exporting. I export 1 year, then I know what are the problems, I know what are the costs associated. Then I come back, change my production process a bit, try to innovate, make it more efficient, then go back again export. That's called learning by exporting. That I'm learning through the process by exporting. But most of the empirical evidences that we get about self-selection rather than learning by exporting. Self-selection is a method.
How empirically can we distinguish between two categories?
Oh, yes. So you can see self-selection is basically you will see what the firms were doing before they're participating in the export market. And they are continuously exporting on and on. So there are exporters which are serial exporters. They continue to export. There are non-sequential exporters. I export once, after 4 years, I export once. So that's basically not self-selection. I know I'm going to go to producing market, then I go to the export market and I'm continuously exporting.
Learning like
You're self-selecting in the export market. But when you're learning, you are not learning all the things or the tricks in the same year. You come back and do not exporting again for that. I'm learning the process, then you come back in the 5th year. That's basically learning by exporting.
and then it will differ.
That will differ. Then I can come back again 1 year because a lot of exporters do not export every year as well because they don't tend to export. But people who are self-select themselves, they're inherently good. That's why they self-select themselves in the export market. One more, yes. There are many extensions, three important extensions. One was Bernard, Reading, and Short. They use this heterogeneous model, then in a general equilibrium setup. Farm, country, industry characteristics interact, how trade costs fall when there is trade liberalization in a general equilibrium setup, and what they find is there is simultaneous within and across relocations of economic activity and jobs. So the industries where we have comparative advantage, net job creation happens. In industries which do not have comparative advantage, there is job loss that happens. That's what they found in extending heterogeneous farms model into industry characteristics. Then Melitz-Ottaviano comes. Melitz-Ottaviano says that there is endogenous differences in the toughness of the competition. That when you're selling in different markets, the toughness of those markets are very different. When you're selling, let's say, from Europe, the competition in Europe is very different from competition in US, or say competition in Africa, competition in, I don't know, Australia. So that's why firms strategize themselves. Depending where you are in the productivity distribution, firms tend to self-select again which markets I'm going to serve. Depending on the toughness, if I'm very close in, let's say, to certain other firms from certain other countries, I tend to not serve that market because uncertainty is very high for me. Because I don't know the consumer is going to buy from me or the other ones. So that's the toughness of the market. So that also changes from strategies, how to sell in different markets. The last one, I think, yes. This one? Oh, this one, what they did was they put the heterogeneous firms in a general equilibrium setup with farm, country, and industry characteristics. When you do that, what they find is there is reallocation of activities across industries in a sense that there is between industry allocation. For example, if certain industries have more comparative advantage, there would be these industries tend to perform better, and there will be worker mobility from those industries to other industries. There will be net job creations. Because I'm doing good, those, let's say, the 100 firms in leather industries are doing good. So what will happen is, and the other, let's say, for example, I don't know, producing trucks is not doing good. India is exporting not good trucks. So what will happen is, this I'm giving far example because this characteristics are very different. For example, shirts with shoes. Let's take this example. If I'm doing very good in shirts than shoes, and people tend to have similar skill, there will be more job creations in the shirt producing industry than the skills. And people tend to move from shirt producing industries to the shoe producing industry to the shirt producing industries. So there will be net job creation in the comparative advantage. The industries where we produce good at cheaper cost, these industries tend to grow more. Firms tend to grow more rather than other firms of other industries where we do not produce goods at comparative advantage.
Automation can tell this thing.
Automation depends on which industry you are in.
If you have more comparative advantage, then there is more automation in that sector.
Yes, but the geometric effects are not clear. So if you want to read, Ajay has an article very recently. Ajay who is the recent Nobel Prize, one of the recent Nobel Prize winners. Ajay said if the effects are not very clear. If you see general equilibrium, partial equilibrium, automation leads. But if you're thinking of a long-run overlap generation model with a general equilibrium approach, the effects are not very clear. Still not clear with AI. We are tending to, what Ajay says, we are over jumping the step, thinking automation will take all the jobs. It's not clear. For example, if you think about, it's similar like the battery cars. If you think about battery cars in a general equilibrium setting, we really don't know that we are actually saving. The cost is going down because we do not always include the disposal of the battery cost. If you include the waste of the battery cost, when the car is there, we do not, if you don't include that, we are not very clear that the production of the saving of the environment with the wastage, we put this everything together in a general equilibrium setting, we are not very clear. We are actually doing it correctly or not. So many things seem very easy in a partial equilibrium approach, but as an economist, we think in a general equilibrium style, right? We have to put the entire production process into mind. With the inputs and the outputs, everything, then things become very unclear. To write articles in the newspaper is absolutely clear, but not in a paper. Right? And the last one is Bernard, Reading, and Schott. This is more or less where the big papers of Mellitz kind of end. So what they do was, they say that not farm has a separate marginal cost. Most of the farms that are exporters are multi-product farms. You know what multi-product farms is? The farms are producing more than one product. These are called multi-product farms. But even the farm has different marginal cost for each product. That's what they say. that even because a lot of farms has, even the multi-product farms, so most of the farms are multi-product, but each of the farm has one or two core product, we call it. The farms produces the best. Rather than the other set of products are called peripheral products, which I don't produce the best. Our core products is basically empirically, you can think of, it is the 60 to 70% of your sales is driven by one or two products. These are my core products, which are produces the best. So in those products, so what they argue is these two products or one product has a separate marginal cost rather than the other products, which makes sense, absolutely. Because that's why I'm doing it. I am producing that product more and I have more competence in that product. And that's because I'm doing it the best. Because my things of not doing the others, because I'm not doing that good. That's why those are my peripheral products. So that's marginal cost of those products are very different from the marginal cost of those products. But you have more or less similar conclusion. Findings are very similar. It's just that they are deriving, like setting up the model are very different. Right, so this is more or less new theory. What we will do tomorrow is we'll start with looking at why farms are very different, some empirical observations. Then we'll do three models a bit in detail. One is the millets. I'll give you a snapshot of the millets, but give you some more. There's one more model again, which I didn't cover today, in interest of time, called Eaton and Cook. So it is exactly similar point in time. They came out in 2003. Both came out in Econometrica. It's just that millets got more popular than Eaton and Cook. Jonathan Eaton passed away now, but Jonathan Eaton had lifetime grudge. I know this personally, that's why I can say this. He had a lifetime grudge that why my model didn't become popular at the same point in time, at the same journal it came out. It's just because their model was not analytically tractable. The distribution, we'll see, the distribution they assumed to solve the model was very difficult to kind of conceptualize. So when it's had Cantor distribution, which is very similar, and we had Frechet distribution, which is very difficult.
Maybe they had quick distribution.
Huh?
Maybe distribution
was Cantor distribution, and there were Frechet distribution.
Economists had Goyla content with Pareto distribution.
Yes, most of them. It's very easy to solve the things in Pareto distribution. And the other one was Mellets of Tapiana. So we'll do this three, and then we'll have some tutorial. You already have your laptops, right? So we will do some tutorials tomorrow as well. Get some hands-on with the data. Yes, please.
Can you please elaborate when a person or an economist works on a theoretical model? Considering it's not always easier to imagine or conceptualize when I'm presenting something, how to make it acceptable for the world to understand what is something which I am thinking about? Does it always have to come along with an empirical practice?
No, not at all. Most of the theory never had empirics.
But in India, the people actually don't opt for theoretical modeling, considering it's very, but we are going into
So it differs. So, for example, it differs. I cannot say about India, for example, because I don't have the experience. I did my master's and that's about it. And I don't get actually. When I actually did my studies, I really don't have any exposure to how the academic market or the supervisors. But in general, what I've seen, theorists. So my supervisor is a theorist, straight theorist, and he's a student of L02. And he is an extremely, what we say is theorist in a sense that very free. So if you are, so my main paper in the PhD thesis had a theory and an empirics. But he first wanted to put me the theory and empirics. No, this is not. So in a sense that if you are not contributing in the theory, in a truest form of the theory, that theory is actually contributing in a newest form, the pure theorists say don't do theory. my supervisor only said to me that do empirics, don't do theory being a theorist, because in theory, it gets very difficult to publish in the top journals because theorists are very finicky. In the sense, if you're really, so let's say, or there is a model with alpha plus beta, you just put gamma and write a model that's not a theory. They will say that's not a theory. Then anyone can do this. If you can change the parameters, change something and do something else, otherwise, so it differs in a sense. Sometimes what we do is, sometimes I also have a couple of papers now where we had some empirical observations and then we went back to rationalize those empirical observations with the theory. So it differs, it's not always one-way process. Sometimes it comes, we solve the model in a backward induction where, if you think about the game theory, we go with a backward induction. It's also theory empirics works like that sometimes. When we can rationalize, so what Richard used to say, Richard used to say to me that why when Krugman did it, when I did it in the late 80s PhD, why he used to write theory? Because data sets were not available to answer the economic intuitions. That's why you have to write theories. Now you have microest level data set, and that if the empirical observations can explain the economic intuitions, why do you need a theory? It's just then the theory is just for the sake of theory. You don't need the theory.
But that's all, no?
Huh? No, for actually the theory say no. That's what I'm saying. It depends on the theory. If you have the best of the theorists around you, they kind of discourage actually. They would not say, then come up with an interesting empirical question, get an interesting data set, new data set, show the world that you have something empirically newly observed that's much more celebrated than doing something alpha plus beta plus gamma when alpha plus beta existed. That would all more be acceptable because you have thought of a new question, you have thought of a new data set to show that question. You have some innovation there. That's also innovation. But that is not an innovation. For theorists, this is what I learned from my supervisor. This is actually what I'm telling in other terms of what Richard told me. Like he actually decided me not to do theory. I started with doing theory. He said, no. First, put it into the appendix, and then it completely got dropped. I started writing theory model, and then no, this is not happening. So yeah, trade theorists, I have worked on the trade theorists, they are very free. But long run, 8 years down the line, 9 years down the line, I can see why Richard is really visionary, because the space of trade theory is getting very narrow. Very narrow.
So how to make space in that narrow space?
Oh my God. These comes with a lot of understanding of the literature, a lot of fine tuning to understand how the contribution is at. See, we still, so to understand the contribution of a paper, we still fumble. Actually understand what the contribution of the paper lies in the literature, it's an ever learning process. It cannot, there is no one set of rule to actually learn it. The more you read it, the more your understanding goes that. Then kind of take it out that this is really a gap, and then the theory comes in. For example, I can give you one example since I talking, it came to my mind that one theory that we can still do it, which is in trade theory, which sector we don't. So let me pose this question. Most of the farm level data, most of the trade theory is utilizing which type of data? Which product type of data? Or the trade? Which products? Which kind of products? Which sector that we use in trade theory? Manufacturing. Right? Why? No. They did available for other sectors as well. Why not agriculture? Why not services?
I don't know about services, but maybe this.
There's a theoretical reason.
So
there's an empirical reason.
because of this tradable sector, you always focus more.
Why it's tradable sector and non-tradable sector? What is the economic implication? There's a theoretical contribution actually.
I think due to balance and
no, balance happens is okay, but what is the economic fundamental economic reason?
So, but then if we go back to the ancient studies, that all mercantilism and then all that. That is all tradable products. And tradable products.
Tradable products means what? What is so economically easy with tradable products and not economically easy lies in the fundamental thing of what we have learned. What is production function? We can write down the production function of tradable products. We cannot write down the production function of non-tradable products because we cannot define input prices of non-tradable products. We can define the input prices of tradable products. I have an accountant in Nigeria. Can you define the input prices of this? No. I can have services cross-border. Cannot define the input prices? No. Since economics cannot define input prices, cannot write the production function, how do I solve the model? If someone can write it, then there will be an evolution of empirics, or you will not see services paper. If you go to the best of the journals of the world, you will not see services paper. It's just because of this, because your paper will not be ever accepted. Because I cannot think of the production function. What is the input? I cannot calculate the productivity because I cannot. What is productivity? Output by input, right? If I don't know the input, how can I define the productivity? What is the input of productivity? In product tradable, because every product has a tariff. That's why I know the cost of it. In services, there is a tariffs. There are tariffs, but I don't know for every product because there are cross-border services. So there is a contribution. You can see. We can write a trade in services model. We will be welcoming to empirics of it. So there is a strong contribution actually. Someone has to write it somewhere. Yeah, trade model in services. Heterogeneous trade for model in services. And that's it. Then boom, there will be evolution of papers like one Melitz wrote. And we'll all concentrate to services. Yes, Sudha. Thank you. Thank you all.